Hello and welcome to the channel. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you the performance of the new M1 Mac Mini and seeing if it could potentially replace an iMac. So if you're like me, you've seen a ton of different benchmarks and videos about the new M1 Macs, the MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, and the Mac Mini over the past few weeks, and you might be wondering if it could replace your current machine. Now, my iMac is a 2017 iMac that was the top spec at the time, and you know, the CPU power is beaten by the new M1 Mac. They're very, very fast, but the GPU in the iMac is potentially maybe twice as strong as the M1 Mac Mini. Does this make enough of a difference? There's also other aspects which are really important for video editors, which is the strength of the built-in hardware for encoding and decoding different kinds of video. So there's H.264, H.265, also known as HEVC, and there's ProRes, and the performance of each of them is a bit different on each of the machines. Now, it's all a bit complex. Your mileage may vary, mine certainly did, and I'm going to take you through a heap of tests I've run and let you know what I've figured out. The simplest test was just putting about a minute of H.264 4K footage on a timeline. This is all shot on my GH5, and this is typical footage that I would normally use. And, you know, just regular playback, smooth on both. The M1 was way faster to export, as you can see. And this is an export done to ProRes using the app Chrono X Pro. It automates processes relating to exporting from Final Cut Pro and helps you run tests really consistently and easily. All the ProRes tests here were run with that, and I'd recommend taking a look. Now, when I cranked up the difficulty a bit, taking a lot more footage and putting it into multicams, what I did was I took a minute of 2 angles, a minute of 3 angles, and then a minute of 4 angles and tried playing it back. And the M1 struggled when I got to 4 angles. Okay, now that was all on better quality, but better performance still dropped a heap of frames. It really did hit a cliff when you get to 4 angles. But I got a colleague, Paul Usher, who's the app guy. He tested on his 16 gig M1 MacBook Pro with exactly the same footage, and it was fine. So you need more RAM if you'd want to do 4 streams of 4K multicam. Cool. Now, in terms of exports, it was interesting. It was faster on the Mini, but much faster in ProRes than to H.264. That's not really what I'd expect. And this is all to fast SSDs on both machines, just the internal drives. And so it seems then that the H.264 exports are not as well optimized on the M1 as they are on the iMac using the Intel's QuickSync built into the consumer CPU. Okay, so cranking up the difficulty again, not multicam anymore, but 10-bit H.264 from a GH5. And this is 4K footage at 422. And yeah, the iMac started dropping frames. Even under better performance, it was dropping frames. This has always been fairly difficult to deal with on the iMac, and you either need a very recent iMac or iMac Pro or Mac Pro to deal with it. But the M1 seems to have hardware acceleration built in. It never dropped a frame. It was 3 times as fast to export. If you want to deal with 10-bit H.264, M1's a clear win. Now, 10-bit HEVC, it didn't drop any frames on either of them, which is interesting. And half this footage was anamorphic footage from the GH5, which is HEVC 420 10-bit. And I also used Dolby Vision from a latest iPhone 12 Pro Max. Both of them were fine. They both did really well. So that's quite impressive. It means there's some software optimization going on the iMac in the latest 10.5 update with the Pro Formats update. But the Mac Mini was still faster to export to ProRes. Cool. Anyway, that's quite good. Now, this is where it got really interesting. I took a complex mixed timeline. This is a typical timeline for me based on something I just delivered to a client using some titles and transitions from Leno FX from a couple of their packs. Now, the M1 Mini dropped frames. It didn't like having the drop zone with 2 more 4K clips in there, and most of the time it started dropping frames there. Sometimes it made it a little further and got it as far as the transition before it started dropping frames, but it didn't help going to better performance, and it didn't even help making it a 1080p timeline. So if you want to do more complex graphics on your timeline, maybe the M1 is not quite enough, and you might want to wait for a Mac which has a stronger GPU to go along with that Apple Silicon. It was also slower to export, but really it was the timeline performance that was the killer for me. Now, you could obviously wait for background rendering to kick in. It's not that this is going to be impossible to do, but given I can do it in real time on my iMac and it did not drop frames there, this is not really something I would want to change, which is unfortunate given the other speed boosts. Now, when you crank up the difficulty of the graphics again, and this was just a 30-second timeline with a Leno FX title and then a few from Motion VFX. They have lots of great titles and generators and things. The very first one was very, very slow, unplayable and better performance, better quality on either Mac. And it was a dog, and you can see the exports were really, really slow. So I took that one out. And so then it was a lot closer on the Mac Mini, and it was okay, but it was still a little slower. So yeah, more complex graphics still favored the discrete GPU, but it never really gave up like it did with the 4 streams of 4K multicam, or with 8 gig of RAM, or with the previous more complex title. So the more you've got going on, the more layers, the more you need a GPU, apparently. Now, some compressor tests. This one was totally unfair because this Mac doesn't have a T2 chip, which would accelerate some kinds of HEVC, and the Mac Mini M1 clearly accelerates this. 232 seconds versus 8 is a ridiculous comparison. And so if you need to output 10-bit HEVC, say you want to work with HDR, you definitely want a T2 chip, or more probably an M1 Mac. It's super fast. Now, there's some compressor tests here that I ran which were pretty interesting, using a much longer timeline as more of a stress test. And this is from a TV show that I'm trying to get off the ground, so let's fingers crossed there. It's 22 minutes long, but it's going to HEVC. It was really way, way faster, as you can see, if you're going to 8-bit on the M1 Mac. And it was also much faster going to ProRes on the M1 Mac. But weirdly, it was slower going to H.264. The iMac beat it. And that was pretty curious. I did run this test a couple of times, and it was the same each time. So that's a really interesting one. If you're still going to H.264, you may not see such huge speed boosts on the new M1 Mac Mini. Going to Handbrake, it was way faster on the M1, another winner there. And going to Motion, you want more instances of a replicated shape, and the M1, really did win. Now, this task was an interesting one. It's a big replicator that I made. It's oversized. It's got thousands and thousands of copies of a simple shape to make pretty flow diagrams, and the iMac was destroyed by the M1. Even though it had a proper GPU, I'm guessing this task must be CPU bound. So, interesting. But yeah, M1 won. So should you switch? Well, this is going to depend on what you do. If you're doing simple edits, so not a lot of multicam, or you're using 10-bit difficult footage, it could well be faster. Now, there may be diminishing returns going to RED or super high-end footage, but I haven't tested that. If you mostly export to H.264, though, it's only likely to be a bit faster because that isn't as strongly accelerated on the M1 as it was with previous Intel iMacs. Now, if you are exporting to HEVC, though, that's, I think, a clear win for the M1. Mind you, if you have a more recent Mac, which does have the T2 chip, I'm not sure. Now, if you make use of more complex motion graphics, you probably want to wait until Apple release a chip which has a better GPU as part of it. Let's hope there's an iMac coming next year which does this, or Mac Mini Pro would be lovely. Because you will need more GPU power to do more complex things with graphics. Because this is a large part of what I do on a number of different projects, not all, but most of them, I think I probably can't shift to an M1, which is unfortunate, at least not with my main iMac. For a laptop, it's a much easier comparison because the graphics power just wasn't there on the previous mobile chips. As a replacement for the machines that they actually replaced, the M1 is an excellent choice. It's just probably not quite there for pro workflows on an iMac yet. And yes, do get 16 gig of RAM, because you will need it for doing 4 streams of 4K multicam and potentially other workflows as well. Sometimes, but not always, 8 gig is a bottleneck. Okay, if that helped, or if you want to know more about Final Cut Pro, hey, want to buy the book I wrote? It is huge, 150,000 words, 750 plus pages, called Final Cut Pro Efficient Editing. Now, yes, there is an X in the name at the moment, but the update has already been shipped to the publisher and will be out soon because it's all print on demand and electronics can be updated pretty quickly. So the X is being removed in the next update. There weren't really very many changed or new features, so you can buy it now or you can buy it in a week when hopefully the update is live. There's a 25% off discount for paper and electronic on Amazon. You can also buy it from Packed, from Apple iBooks if you like. And there's a whole lot more details and a free chapter at fcpxefficientediting.com or indeed at fcpefficientediting.com. Alrighty, I really hope you like it. People seem to. It would absolutely be appreciated if you want to take a look. Thanks very much for watching, and if you want to like and subscribe, then please feel free. Otherwise, I will see you on the next one. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.